This is the RPG Crawler, and welcome to Shelf of Many Things, where I take a look at independent and small press role-playing games and role-playing game accessories. This week I'm taking a look at not one product, but three. Three OSR adventures for a couple of systems from the Merciless merchants, who have an entire series of such modules and were kind enough to send me these for review. I am presuming, at least in part, that these are representative of the other modules in their catalog, as they seem to be some of the early ones they produced. In this case, I'll be reviewing The Red Prophet Rises, Standoff at Sandfell Sea Fort, and Tar Pits of the Bone Toilers. Red Prophet and Sea Fort are designed for Golden Glory, a 2nd edition retro clone, while Bone Toilers is designed for Labyrinth Lord, but as usual with OSR-style games, they're fairly compatible with one another. Level ranges are low to middling as well, with Red Prophet being geared for levels 3 to 5, Sea Fort being geared for levels 4 to 7, and finally Bone Toilers from 5 to 8. Now, because this is a review of 3 adventures, I'm going to mix it up a bit by giving a brief overview of each one in turn, my thoughts on individual ones, and then my thoughts on the general common elements between all 3. But first, let's take a quick look at the books themselves. All 3 of them are available as PDFs or as print on demand through DriveThruRPG. Each of these has a full-color soft cover with black and white interior, formatted in a pretty standard 2 columns with inline box text, charts where necessary, and black and white artwork. The Red Prophet Rises has maps for each section near the appropriate sections in the content, with new spells and monsters and items detailed near the back of the book all at once. While the other 2 move the maps to a section in the back of the book, along with the details of the monsters and items. While having ample content, none of these adventures is particularly lengthy. The Red Prophet clocks in at around 30 pages of actual content, the Sea Fort at just over 20 of actual content, and in Bone Toilers just a few pages over that. It's enough to produce a fair amount of exploration time and a cohesive, self-contained story without really having to be part of any overarching campaign. Now let's take a look at each of these in turn, starting with The Red Prophet Rises. And this is where there's probably going to be some spoiler material, so be on alert. As I stated above, The Red Prophet Rises is designed for Golden Glory and suited for a party of levels 3 to 5. Inspired by pagan sacrifice rituals, it deals with a barbaric blood cult led by a prophet by the name of Khazra. Based out of a camp in a canyon complex, they have been raiding the local settlements and sacrificing them to their bull god. An interesting bonus with this scenario is that it's also set up as a paladin mount quest. Rather than simply wandering out and finding their new mount in a clearing somewhere, this gives the paladin character a chance to actually rescue their soon-to-be new companion. Further, there's some optional benefit for parties that don't have a paladin but want to rescue the horse anyway. The Red Prophet Rises starts with an introductory section that has background on the events, developments that happen during the adventure, as well as information on the people of the Bull, which make up the majority of the initial foes, as well as a sort of mystic vision to get paladins started on the quest to free their mount, if that's needed. There's a good old-fashioned rumor table available and a schedule of daily events that take place during the actual adventure in the canyon complex. It should be noted that there is a rough time limit of about a week to complete at least the first section of the adventure, since the continued action of the cult actually does summon something bad eventually. The first section of the campaign is Khazra's Canyon, which is a group of connected caves around a canyon where the people of the Bull live. A random encounter chart is given for this section, and the canyon and adjacent caves have about 27 keyed areas, some of which are actually used a few times in different, but otherwise identical chambers. These are divided into the canyon itself, the cultist caverns, and the caverns of blood. The vast majority of enemies in the canyon are human, either guards or cultists, with the occasional animal. However, there are a scattering of other humanoid monsters, including an ogre, as well as 3 monstrous champions that fight regularly during the cult's regular blood rituals, and which the party may be forced to face if they are captured. Also in the canyon is Arum, grandson to the King of Horses, the mount that the paladins can rescue. On the same map are the cultist caverns, which are again filled mostly with human creatures. The Caverns of Blood again have human creatures, but this time they include a number of acolytes and other casters, and additionally include Khazra's chambers. Throughout all of this section of the adventure, certain named creatures may move around in different areas depending on what time of day it is and whether the party has raised an alarm. According to the schedule in the front of the book, that can mean that they run into things when they don't really expect it. There's also several NPCs that can be rescued, some of which may provide the party with allies or be escorted out of the canyon for additional reward. The second section of the adventure includes 16 more encounter areas in an underground segment beneath the caverns. It is accessed via a few different ways and basically comprises both natural caverns and ancient ruins. The human encounters from the world above give way to more monstrous, weird encounters, including a trapped demon, ancient skeletons, creatures crafted from obsidian, and a unique keeper of names that can devastate a group with long-term true name magic. This is also where the obelisk that thirsts, a supernatural extraterrestrial entity that absorbs the blood from the rituals of blood lies, although it is hidden. Its destruction is key to solving the threat posed by the area on a more permanent basis. After the adventure, there are a few new spells suited for Golden Glory or other old-school compatible systems, as well as a few new monsters to represent the creatures around the obelisk. There's also a fair number of unique magical items that the adventure has, which are generally low to moderately powered, except for a few artifacts gained during the final cavern section. Specific creatures and NPCs are statted out after the magic items section. Standoff at Sandfell Sea Fort is the next adventure in the line, and is suited for characters of levels 4 to 7, again for the For Golden Glory system. Being situated around a bay, this adventure has a more nautical theme. A lighthouse has been set dark for more than a week, and ships in the area have begun to have issues, including the one that crashed into the shoals. The captain of that ship has spread stories of a possessed crew and unusual lights. A rescue party has already been sent to the ship, so the characters are instead hired to check up on the lighthouse itself. Upon investigating, the party learns that some creatures who'd taken to lairing in the nearby coastal sea fort were angered by the light from the lighthouse shining upon them and were responsible for at least some of the trouble. Whereas Red Prophet was more of a straightforward dungeon crawl, a good amount of Sandfell Sea Fort involves a sort of coastal hex crawl. There's introductory information about the area, including details on the evil sea creatures, the Hystrix, which are evil seahorse humans. Yes, evil humanoid seahorses. And the good elephant seal-like Gahundan. Now, I have to admit that I am used to old-school style modules, including strange humanoid creatures that, may or may not make sense, but even I think these are a little bit on the goofy side. The brief introductory section also includes some adventure hooks to get the parties involved, as well as 2 random encounter tables, one to use while sailing around the bay, the other to use on land. There's some expectation that the party will have a boat or a ship, since the lighthouse they're investigating is actually out on an island in the bay. There's also a good old-fashioned rumor table that can give insight as to what to investigate. The bay itself is set up as a sort of hex crawl, with only a few of the encounters actually mapped out in their own sections. There's 9 points of interest overall, including the starting town of Mahova, Locum's Beacon, the lighthouse in question, of course, a few random sea-style creatures along the shore, including a group of pirates that may not immediately be hostile since they actually wish to rescue their captain. There's the Crown of Thorns area, which includes the pirate's ship, a village for the Gahundan people, an injured mermaid that may request the party's help, and finally the Sandfell Sea Fort itself. Interestingly, the main key locations are treated as appendices for some reason, with Appendix A covering the lighthouse Locum's Beacon. There's a murder scene to be investigated within that lighthouse, and a few magical creatures inhabiting the lighthouse itself, with clues that might indicate the unnatural creatures that attacked the place and the strange lights near the Sandfell Sea Fort, thus cluing characters in on the whole deal. Next up is the Crown of Thorns section, which covers the pirate ship, the Red Tempest. It is basically a ship crawl with some mind-controlled pirates, culminating in a fight with a big mind-controlling starfish. It seems somewhat unrelated to the main core of the adventure, but it's fun enough, and it is a good way to get a party to, go ahead and free the pirates without killing many of them, and maybe earn an ally or two. Finally, there is the Sandfell Sea Fort itself, which is the bulk of the adventure area. Basically an old sea fort that's been taken over by the seahorse-like Hystrix. It includes 21 encounter areas, 9 of which are in the upper portions of the sea fort, and the rest of which are in flooded hallways beneath. The flooded hallways area is mostly underwater, with only a few rooms not completely filled, making for the usual awkwardness of underwater adventuring. The creatures in these halls are mostly variations of the Hystrix, but there are also a few creatures such as eels and even a golem made of coral. After the adventure material, there's a few monster types that appear in the adventure as well as some relevant maps for the mapped areas. Although Sandfell Sea Fort has a few new magic items, these are described in sidebars during the adventure itself rather than in its own section. The final adventure, the Tar Pits of the Bone Toilers, is different in that it is designed for a simpler system, Labyrinth Lord, although the difference is largely academic. Most of the material is fairly compatible with all other OSR games, with the main points of divergence being in the monster stat blocks. It is suited for levels 5 to 8, and is thus the highest level of the 3 adventures here. In Bone Toilers, a new trade route is being plotted through some canyons, although the last 2 expeditions haven't actually returned. Now the party is hired to scout a route through, only to find that an ancient portal to an otherworldly realm has opened and begun to disgorge strange invaders into the area the route is set to go through. The introductory chapter once again has adventure hooks to get people interested in the adventure, as well as a rumor table with references to areas around the adventure itself, a wandering encounter table for the first section. The first section is once again a canyon segment, this time a marshy one filled with swamp-themed creatures. There's a crazy old hermit, a giant croc, some other threatening animals, various human looters, even a Medusa. There's 21 encounter areas overall, although not all include combat. The second segment is an ancient lizardman crypt that can be found within the canyon itself. Interestingly enough, this segment is entirely optional and sealed behind a secret door, so it's entirely possible that the group could simply miss it entirely. The crypt itself is relatively small, with just 8 encounters, heavy on the undead, and with a decent set of treasure for the level. The ruined village of Karazhan is situated in the canyon itself, and breaks out into a sort of sub-map with just 4 encountered areas scattered amongst the few remaining ruins, again with mostly an undead theme. The segment thereafter is the Waterfall Caverns, and is again a hidden optional area, although this time it's simply hidden behind a waterfall in the canyon rather than an actual secret door. It's got 8 encounter areas that include beetles, a few elemental creatures, a mimic, and a strange fountain of youth. All in all, it's actually decently rewarding and perhaps a little easier to find than the Lizardman Crypt. The Bone Toiler Fort is another subsection within the Greater Canyon and consists of an area overrun with the Bone Toilers, influenced by the portal that has opened up in the valley. It has a bunch of creatures within it who follow an event table that directs the goings-on within the fort itself. There's just 7 encounter areas in which the party can encounter not only Bone Toilers, but new Bone Abomination-type creatures. Beneath the fort is the Bone Toiler Cave, where the adventure culminates in a final dungeon crawl. This area is riddled with new Bone Toilers, as well as new creatures called Skullwicks, and the occasional wandering Bone Golem. There's 16 encounter areas in all here, capped by an encounter with a Bone Devil. A few unique bone-themed magic items are scattered here as well. The conclusion is sort of left ambiguous. The portal can be closed, but there's actually options for a follow-up adventure set on the other side of the portal, although I don't know if that one's actually been released as of this recording. The adventure is, of course, followed by a section of new monsters with stats in the standard Labyrinth Lord format, most of which are bone-themed. This is followed by a description of the Marrow Ravine, an otherworldly place on the other side of the portal, although it's only described in generalities. Maps and a list of monster locations complete the adventure write-up. So technically the adventures are decently written. Each one is interesting enough to catch interest and offers a fair degree of exploration, although Sandfell Seaforge is perhaps the shortest in terms of actual content between the three. That is made up for by the more open nature of a hex crawl included in that one, however minor a hex crawl it may be. Technically, the adventures follow a more old-school flow, with some encounters being just a little bit more than simple notations. I can't really come down too hard on the editing in this format, since it did remind me of old-school adventures in general. The art, although largely stock, is very suitable for each adventure in turn, and seems well selected. The threats in all three adventures are certainly unique, even the Red Prophet, which relies heavily on human enemies. There's little in the way of classic humanoids or other such monsters like orcs, goblins, that sort of thing, although they are occasionally present. And the main antagonists of each of the three monsters, the obsidian creatures, the hystrix, and the bone toilers, certainly depart from the tread-over tropes that most adventurers have presented in these level ranges, while still retaining a certain old-school feel to them. It's akin to when other creatures like the drow or vegapygmies actually appeared for the first time, where they were new and somewhat unknown rather than just the same old thing over and over again. The challenges of the encounters presented are each pretty on par for the level range, with appropriate variation, of course, and the treasure seems to be pretty well balanced. Where it is more generous, it is also more difficult to find, thus mitigating how much a party might actually end up with. I do like the use of canyons to present an alternative to the usual cave or corridors, although this can only be done so many times before it gets a little old. I do appreciate that Red Prophet has the opportunity to bring in a paladin's quest for his mount. It gives more of a reason to play the module for these groups with a paladin present, and I'd like to actually see more modules that have class-based rewards in them. A quest to find a Holy Avenger, for instance, or some sort of Warlock's quest, although I guess that's more 5th edition type stuff. I can understand that would limit the intended audience for such an adventure, so I see why it's not done as often as I'd like. I mentioned that Sandfell Seafort has the briefest overall content, although still adequate for what it does, but I'd almost say that's about the minimum I'd expect for a full adventure in that level range. Bone Toilers has more dungeon crawling, but fully 2 areas within it are actually optional and might be missed by a party that doesn't go out of its way to explore thoroughly. I'm of a mixed mind on that. On the one hand, I adore the use of missable content that can give replay value to a module for different groups. On the other hand, and I've mentioned this with regards to other adventures that have a lot more optional content, it can make the adventure seem a lot shorter than it actually is. With that having been said, even without the missable content, Bone Toilers is pretty solid enough and feels like a full-length adventure anyway. About the only other minor nitpick that I have, and it's a technical nitpick with the books, and it's present in all 3 of them, is the relatively low resolution of the maps on occasion. Yeah, they're black and white, and you can really easily read them all the same, but it does tend to make them appear a little bit fuzzy in some instances, or even pixelated. Now, this does seem to get better with later modules, and honestly, it doesn't really detract from the actual feel of most of the other content within. It's, as I said, just a nitpick. Overall, these 3 modules offer a very solid, fun adventure, each one, with an old-school styling for any OSR enthusiast, with each more suited to a different terrain type. They should probably easily enough be inserted to any campaign for just a few sessions, if not more, and, I honestly kind of like that. If you're looking for a low to middling range adventure to pick up for an OSR campaign, then any of these 3 will actually suit the bill nicely. You'll probably just want to pick whichever one's more suitable to the adventure you're already running. And if this is typical of the material that the Merciless merchants produce, I'm, gonna say that it might be worth checking out the other offerings from them. The price does seem really reasonable as well, especially for the PDF versions. Now I'm going to go ahead and leave links to where you can purchase these in the description below. For now, this has been the RPG Crawler with Shelf of Many Things. If you like what you've seen, remember to leave a like, comment if you got any feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content, both tabletop and computer. Until next time, take care and goodbye.